What would Macklin Celebrini bring to the Sharks and the Blackhawks if either team wins the draft lottery? Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks joins the show.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young of The Reef, head writer, editor-in-chief, dude. I don't know. I need to think of a title. Thank you, of course, for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. And if you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch this on YouTube as well. Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks joins. We have a fun conversation about next week's draft lottery, where we discuss what would Celebrini bring to our teams if our teams were to win the draft lottery. Then we kind of discuss why the sky doesn't fall if your team doesn't win the lottery, and who we kind of like with that second pick. I make the case for Zeev Buium, guys. I love me Zeev Buium. And then we kind of talk about some of the big questions we have for our teams heading into the off season. So before we get into all that, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go, now free on Google Play or on the App Store. Game on. And now we bring in Jack from Locked On Blackhawks. Jack, how's your offseason going, buddy?
It has been going good. Some different type of topics to be talking about. Obviously, the draft lottery is right around the corner. Very intriguing time of year for both of our teams. So it's been nice to kind of talk about something different. I'm sure you feel the same, other than our teams just constantly losing. So, and it's kind of been that way for the Blackhawks and sadly for the Sharks as well these last couple of years. So quite honestly, JD, I've come accustomed to really loving the offseason and all the hypothetical conversations that you could make out of it, and talking about the prospects, the future, hopefully brighter days ahead. Those are always much more fun for me personally than recapping, a 60-loss team here in the NHL, and also getting to watch some pretty good hockey from afar here in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I'm doing well. Weather's getting better. Excited for our chat here because, as I alluded to, a lot of questions surrounding our two teams if we don't get that number one overall selection. And I know we'll be talking about the guy that's going to be going number one overall here in just a moment. So I'm doing well, JD. Thanks for having me back on. How you doing this afternoon?
Hang in there. Like you said, I don't have to watch terrible hockey night in, night out, enjoying the playoffs, enjoying the OHL playoffs. It's great to watch good hockey after, it feels like a treat after the past 82 games. So, but yeah, let's talk about it. Both our teams, we sit 1 and 2 going into the draft lottery. That's on Tuesday next week. And we kind of wanted to have the conversation of, okay, like what happens if our team gets it? And then what happens if our team do not get to that number one overall pick? So I will start with you, Jack. You won the draft lottery last year. You got the generational player in Connor Bedard. Seems like Bedard's on his way to winning the Calder Trophy this year. I know there's very much the Faber group, but I think Bedard ends up winning it. But what would bringing Celebrini to the Blackhawks, did that give you that 1-2 punch that we saw from the Blackhawks literally 15 years ago?
Yeah, we're going to be hoping that May 7th, 2024 treats us as well as May 8th, 2023 did, because adding Macklin Celebrini to this Blackhawks organization, I think solidifies them as the brightest future in the NHL, and I think it would surpass the Anaheim Ducks, giving them the best prospect pool in the entire NHL. And quite frankly, us Blackhawks fans could kind of use that little kick in the rear end, if you will, to get them excited about this team again. I know the San Jose Sharks fans do not want to hear that, but from a Chicago perspective, until the Bears draft last week in the NFL draft, there was little to no excitement about Chicago sports in this city. And I feel like if the Blackhawks were to win the draft lottery and get Macklin Celebrini at number 1 overall. It would be a similar vibe around the Blackhawks that the Chicago Bears fans just had recently. It would be electric and would just give the Blackhawks luxury of riches down the middle. I mean, thinking about Celebrini and Bedard as a 1-2, it's going to make a lot of people think about Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, but obviously Patrick Kane being a winger, I think this would give the Blackhawks their most promising future at the center position, maybe in franchise history, because of what Macklin Celebrini has shown us. An incredible freshman year at Boston University, and obviously what Connor Bedard did in his rookie year as well. And then not to mention Oliver Moore, who's a freshman at Minnesota that went number 19 overall last year. Frank Nazar is a true center who just might have to move to the wing, surely in a pure numbers perspective. So adding Macklin Celebrini to that prospect pool would really put the Chicago Blackhawks over the hump, and I think would kind of switch a gear in the fan base's interest. And that's been kind of needed with just how many losses this team has been accumulating these last few years. I give credit to the Blackhawks fans for still having attendance numbers be rather strong, but I can't lie to you, there isn't a ton of interest around this team in the city of Chicago other than what Connor Bedard is doing 24/7.
No, and from a Sharks perspective, right? Bringing the kid who was a former junior Shark, his dad literally works for the Golden State Warriors. Bringing him back home is why you went through this season, right? This brutal season. You had 4 different losing streaks of at least 9 games this year. And it would help, again, kind of you have that 1-2 punch of Will Smith, Macklin Celebrini. I know there's questions about Will Smith if he's going to play center or not. I still think long-term he's probably going to be a center, but giving you that punch, especially when you have Anaheim in your own division, which is just stockpiled forwards. You have Kurt Gauthier, you've got Troy Terry, you've got there's just like a bunch, Leo Carlson, a bajillion guys that they have on their team, and that's who you have to kind of build against, right? Is kind of going forward is how are you going to compete against Anaheim's depth, and adding a prospect like Macklin Celebrini, I think would help that. And like you said, for attendance records, numbers for the Sharks have been brutal, right? Don't blame ever since COVID, right? The attendance for the Sharks have been brutal. And I think bringing a prospect like Macklin Celebrini and potentially pairing him with Will Smith put some butts back in the seat that I think San Jose desperately needs. So, I know the potential 1-2 down the middle. You mentioned all the other guys there, but from a fan perspective, you mentioned it's been a kind of tough with Chicago, but I mean, this team at least has played hard, right? So, Celebrini, is that just the face of your franchise there? Celebrini and Bedard. I mean, you've got the face of the franchise in Bedard, but adding Celebrini just compete with Caleb Williams and what's going on with the Bears?
I'm not going to lie to you, JD. I would obviously have a huge smile on my face and I would be going crazy. There would be part of me that would feel really bad if the Blackhawks stole this one from the San Jose Sharks, because we got it with Connor Bedard last year, right? I'm not going to complain if it happens again, but for the reasons you just alluded to, a kid that grew up playing for the junior Sharks, this organization really could use a potential star player like that. So I'm not going to say I'm rooting for the Sharks to win the draft lottery, but if it's not the Blackhawks, I would be really, really sad along with you if San Jose doesn't wind up at number 1, my friend, because he is the type of player that could really turn things around. I think in terms of what type of number 1 overall pick he's going to be, I feel like his expectations have only grown because of what he just did as a freshman. His stock is higher now than it was this time last year when we were looking forward to this year's draft. It was okay, Macklin's going to be the number 1. How good is he really going to be? It feels like he's taken that gear to another level this year. You feel the same way?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely watching him and watching a lot of Boston College. Of course, you're watching a lot of Boston University and just those battles between. But the thing I love about Celebrini is he's not the biggest. He's only 6 foot, 190. But again, he's 17, doesn't turn 18 until August. But he plays so much bigger. You see, he's physical enough. Again, playing against guys much older than him in college, was the youngest player in college. his the way he thinks the game, the way he can create for his teammates or his line mates. Again, being able to play, I don't think we can talk enough about how he's a 17-year-old playing in the NCAA, and not just playing, dominating the NCAA. Won the Hobie Baker as the best player in the entire league in a season where Cutter Gauthier almost scored 40 goals. Will Smith, was second or third, I think, in freshman scoring in NCAA in the past 30 years. What he's doing at 17-year-olds is ridiculous, and I think he will be playing in the NHL. I know there's plenty of conversation. Will you bring him back? And so he's got nothing left to prove. He needs to be playing in the NHL next year. And on a team like the Sharks, if the Sharks do win it, just adding some energy to this team. And we saw William Eklund have his moments, and you saw his development. I thought Eklund had a great season this year, but the Sharks they need some juice, man. That's the problem. They just need some juice, something that makes you want to go and watch them, especially if you're going to be losing 6-2 every night. At least make something entertaining. Last season we had Erik Karlsson on his quest for 100 points. This year it was a much, much harder night in, night out, and I think adding Macklin Celebrini will add some of that. So, Jack, before we continue, we're going to talk about what happens if our teams don't get number 1 overall. We're going to discuss some of the guys that we like at number 2 potentially. So we'll get to that here in just 1 minute. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you can work together to build up your others' boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go is new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton, including their unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover at Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or on the App Store. Game on. All right. So what happens if we don't win it? I have this gut sneak, Utah is the team that I'm kind of circling. If Bettman's going to rig it for anybody, it's going to be Utah, right? New owner, fancy, you want new toy. That's the team I'm circling. I know their odds aren't as great as Chicago's were last year at number 3. I think or Utah is at 6 now, but Chicago, say you don't win it, you're at number 2, number 3. Which guys are you potentially looking at right now? Are some of your favorites as we're kind of getting closer and closer to the draft here?
Yeah, number 2, if the Blackhawks wind up with the 2nd overall selection, it is going to put them in a real peculiar position, JD. Not a bad spot, obviously,
no.
But there are a lot of options there, and I'm really curious as to what their biggest priority is in this year's draft, because in terms of pure upside, if they have number 2 overall and they're just looking at pure upside, I think Ivan Demidov is probably the pick. I think there's so much talent there that he's already flashed overseas, plays a high-octane game, another good dynamic playmaker that could be a top 6 piece along with Connor Bedard one day. I think that makes a lot of sense, but I also think one thing the Blackhawks really need in their forward group, they have, even if they don't wind up with Macklin, they already have a lot of really good centers. They could use a winger who also, I think, has some size. One real problem with the Blackhawks these last few years is they haven't had a lot of size out of their premier lines in terms of, you can't always go and skate the puck over the opposing team's blue line. Sometimes you got to go and chip it in and get gritty. And, when you have Connor Bedard and like a Philip Kurashev, and in years past, even Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat, just some smaller players. Feels like that's kind of been an issue for this Blackhawks franchise for a handful of years. And that's why I personally was really okay with the Kirby Dach pick at the time at number 3, because I thought that was a need that they addressed with that selection. And if they feel that same way this year, Cayden Lindstrom kind of gives me similar vibes. And I could see them going in that direction, certainly with how big he is in that power forward type of mold, right? Like, could be a guy in a similar sense to like what Zach Hyman is doing for the Edmonton Oilers, maybe not as rich, but going to the front of the net and having a lot of opportunities because of all the attention that's going to go to Connor Bedard, like is happening with Connor McDavid there. So I think Cayden Lindstrom is a really intriguing pick, but also there's no denying the Blackhawks could probably use another right-handed defenseman in their prospect pool, but the right-handed defensemen that seem like they're going to go earlier within the top 10 are offensive-minded guys. I'm personally higher on Artem Levshunov than Zane Parekh or some of the other guys a little bit further down, but I do wonder, just given they have a Seth Jones for multiple years on the right-hand side as a quarterback on the power play, offensive defenseman, along with Kevin Korchinski, too, who was 7th overall.
Love Korchinski.
I mean, the kid can absolutely wheel in a really high future, still a young 19-year-old. He's known for his offensive side of things as well. So it's like, do you really want to draft a player who's known for his offensive side of things when there might not even be a role exactly for that? And I feel like the Blackhawks, in my mind at least, I feel like they would probably be leaning more towards a reliable defensive defenseman. And because of that, I do wonder if in their second first-round selection that they're getting from Tampa Bay, that's the time that they go after a right-handed defenseman. So like I just kind of outlined, there's a lot of different options there for the Blackhawks. Me personally, if we're just talking pure upside, I think it's probably Ivan Demidov, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see Cayden Lindstrom at that number 2 spot either. But it's a very intriguing draft board this year, 2 through 10. I'd be shocked if, a lot of draft analysts or scouts have 3 or 4 correct selections, because so many things are up in the air. So kind of talk me what you've been seeing when diving into some of these prospects other than Macklin Celebrini, JD.
Yeah, I think from the Sharks' perspective, right, because they have been drafting a lot of forwards, and they kind of the same boat. They drafted a little bit smaller guys. Eklund, who's 5'10", Bordeleau, who's like 5'8", Gushchin, who's 5'8", and some of these guys have started to make their impact. But you saw last year adding Quentin Musty, who's 6'2", 200 pounds before he turned 18. Kasper Holtonen, who's got an insane shot, also a little bigger guy. I could see Mike Grier going in that way, especially with a guy like Lindstrom, who's been kind of tagged with the kind of Quentin Byfield. Like, you're probably gonna have to wait a little bit for it, but when he hits, man, he's going to hit. So I could see that. The Sharks also they need some help on the blue line, and they have kind of more left-handed guys, but they don't really have that one guy you can see to be a true number 1 defenseman. Shakir Mukhamadulin's probably like a really high end number 3, low end number 2, and he's flashed playing in the AHL. They don't have that guy where you can be like, okay, I think this guy's going to be running our power play. And I am willing to risk it all for Zeev Buium. Zeev Buium, who, again, left-handed defenseman, 6'1", just finished his freshman season at the University of Denver, where he won the national championship. Best friends with Will Smith, just saying. I know he's probably going to be more like a 5 through 7 type of pick, but in this year's draft, where there's just so many questions between 2 and 10, I'm just more of a go get your guy. And I think Zeev Buium's the best defenseman in the draft. And I don't care about, height concerns or whatever. I just want good players, and Zeev Buium's a good player. That's my thing. Zeev Buium's a good player. The Sharks need more good players. And I don't care if he's left-handed or right-handed. Just go get me good players. So he's the guy. I love Zeev Buium. I don't know if the Sharks, that might be too rich for them at number 2. I would assume they would probably just kind of Mike Grier, like what he wants. He wants big, mobile defensemen. Artem Levshunov does make a ton of sense there. I'm curious about Anton Silyev, who's 6'7", the left-handed defenseman over in Russia, you get Victor Hedman comparisons, but I don't, from some of the people I've talked to, The offensive upside just isn't quite there from a guy like Zeev. And then you have Zane Parekh, who scored like a bajillion goals in the OHL, but also 6 foot. So there's just so many questions here with the defenseman. And I think it's just going to come down to kind of your personal taste in defensemen. And if you believe in your development team to kind of overcome some of their issues. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Sharks, if they don't get that first overall pick, if they do try to draft a defenseman. I wouldn't even be surprised if they go 2 defensemen with that Penguins pick to try to add some more talent to the blue line.
I'll tell you what, from watching Zeev Buium this year, whether it was at the World Juniors as part of Team USA to help them win gold there, or also playing with Denver this year, Blackhawks have prospect Aiden Thompson playing for them. Just felt like every night they were playing, Zeev was scoring some type of big goal. And I genuinely don't know if I've ever seen the sort of game break ability that he has from a defenseman, man. Like, I think the ceiling is so high there for Zeev. He was incredible this season. And if the Blackhawks needed a left-handed defenseman, I would really be barking up that tree. I just don't know. Given that I think the Hawks want maybe some bigger defensive defenseman, and on the right-hand side, I just think Zeev doesn't align there. But if he wound up with the Blackhawks, I wouldn't be angry whatsoever, because you can't deny the talent. Also, random comment here, JD. You mentioned Quentin Musty earlier on here in segment 2. Did anyone have more fun playing hockey this year than Quentin Musty and Dalibor Dvorsky? So the Blackhawks also have Alex Ferrand, a 4th-round pick from 2023, who played for the Sudbury Wolves this year. So followed Sudbury on social medias, watched their highlights, and keep up with the team to see what's going on. Quentin Musty and Dalibor Dvorsky did everything for that team. I mean, lit the OHL on fire. I don't know if anyone had more fun playing hockey than those 2 guys this year. Quentin Musty, man, looking like a good late 1st-round pick.
Yeah, Musty, a guy who a lot of people picked to be a top 15 pick, falling to the Sharks at 26 last year. There was some concerns with the beginning of the season last year, but came on strong at the end of the season. And I think it was he had to deal with mono, and then they changed their coaches, and new coach, new system allowed him to kind of prosper. But yeah, Musty, if he didn't miss games this year, he got 2 suspensions for slew foots, which is just something to keep an eye on. If he had, and then was also one of the last guys shipped out after Sharks training camp this year. If he played more games, I think he already hit 100 points, and he was this close to being a 2 points per player, or 2 points per game player this year. Was just absolutely on fire. And there was just times where just Musty was the best player on the ice. So it'll be interesting for the Sharks this year if what they kind of do with him, because he's unfortunate with the CHL agreement, right? He either has to play in the NHL or he has to go back to the OHL. And he's just one of those guys where he's too good for the OHL right now, but just not quite ready for the NHL. And that's where, you kind of run into those problems. So, but I think the big takeaway is no matter if either the Blackhawks or the Sharks, if they don't get that first overall pick, there's still so many good players in this draft. You have to yes, it might be disappointing that not get Macklin Celebrini, but you're still going to walk away with a good player in this draft. So don't sweat it, Sharks fans, Hawks fans, especially when Utah wins the first overall pick. So we're going to talk about some of the kind of big questions surrounding our teams going as we're kind of entering the offseason here. So we'll get to that here in just 1 minute.
Real quick, though, folks, I got to talk to you all about the fine people over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in both the NBA and the NHL, and baseball is also back in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. And right now, new customers can get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. That's right. You heard me correct. $150 win or lose. And you can use these bonus bets to bet on everything from slap shots throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs to home runs across all the major league ballparks, and even slam dunks on the way to the NBA championship, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Go and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, all you got to do to get $150 worth of free bets if you're a new customer, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right. So I'm going to start here because the Sharks, I think, have some bigger offseason questions. Like, who's going to be the head coach? And I think that's the big question for the Sharks this year. I know one question for both our teams is how do you infuse more talent so that way you're not continually being the last question. But I think the biggest question right now for the Sharks is who's going to be coaching the team this year? And to be honest, I think it actually might wait until after the draft lottery. I know Mike Grier said they're going to start interviewing people, but it's been a week and we haven't heard a peep about interviews yet. I know we are kind of busy with the U18s right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if a coach isn't really kind of started that process and started until after the draft lottery, because that's very intriguing, I think, to have a potential Macklin Celebrini, knowing you're going to be coaching a potential Macklin Celebrini. Then we might also hear more about the Will Smith decision. I think a lot of what the Sharks are going to do this offseason really hinges on what happens on May 7th.
Yeah, no, big decisions coming for sure for San Jose. I mean, all across the board, in every situation. As far as the Blackhawks go, I would say the biggest move they need to make this offseason is getting another true top six piece. And they tried to do that this past year. Taylor Hall, obviously, they acquired from the Boston Bruins along with Nick Foligno. And I thought he was going to be a perfect line mate for Connor Bedard, a guy who's a former number one overall pick himself, and getting an opportunity to prove that he's still a top line player. Unfortunately, tore his ACL early on and missed the majority of the year. But I still think even had Taylor Hall played this season, the Blackhawks were dead last in the NHL in offense. It was the worst offensive output they've had since the NHL switched to an 80-plus game schedule. They still need another true piece up there. And I give Philip Kurashev a lot of credit for his development this year, along with Bedard on the top line. But I don't think that's going to be his long-term role for this Blackhawks team. So they really need to go and get that extra piece along with Connor Bedard. I don't think they're going to be breaking the bank from what it sounds like in terms of going after the biggest fish on the market, but I certainly expect them to address that position, particularly on the wing. And then defensively, they just need to be more reliable back there. And I think they need to add another true right-handed defenseman, because they're going to have more young blue liners stepping onto the scene next year. Obviously, Vlasic and Korchinski have already done that, but Wyatt Kaiser we saw a little bit this year. Ethan Del Mastro is a guy who was an AHL All-Star as a rookie this year. Might be time for him to make the leap to the NHL as well. Whatever it may be, though, there's going to be young guys on that left-hand side, and Connor Murphy's been good here with the Blackhawks, but he just hasn't been able to stay healthy, man. And when you lose a guy like that and you only really have Seth Jones like they did on the right-hand side, it put this defense in such a bad position. So I think they need to go out there and get another right-handed defenseman. Jared Tenorti, Jacob Magna, they were fillers, but they're just not going to cut it. And this Blackhawks team, they do want to start making strides. So I expect, getting another top six winger and another right-handed defenseman to play on the second and third pairing are probably the two biggest things that they're going to be looking to change for this roster next year, JD.
Yeah, I think Mike Grier and the San Jose Sharks are kind of in the same boat, right? They want to add some pieces that make sense for kind of the timeline for him. And while I think both of our cap situations are much cleaner than they were a couple of years ago, you also know, like, when you acquire these high talented players, like Will Smith, William Eklund's, Connor Bedard, you have to pay them at some point. So even though the cap might be going up, you still got to kind of have to budget that money for them, kind of coming down the pipeline here. So I think Grier is going to kind of look to add some pieces that maybe make sense. You had a guy like Zetterlund who kind of had his breakout season last year, but the Sharks still need another kind of top six guy there. You hope Logan Couture, who played 6 games this year, kind of almost like the Taylor Hall situation, right? You're kind of expecting this guy to take a huge role, Logan Couture, the captain, longtime Shark, right? You expected him to kind of play that middle six, center position, and he was gone for all but 6 games. And when he was there, the Sharks were 4-1-1 when he was in the lineup. So thankfully for the take, I guess, Couture not being there, but we'll see if Couture even is able to play. He talked about from his injury where he was worried he may not even play in NHL again. So but I'm curious to see what Just that infusion of talent that I think both these rosters need. And again, still letting your young guys kind of develop and giving them that pathway to continue to grow and hit their full potential. And I think kind of the same thing on the blue line. The Sharks have a lot of kind of fifth and sixth defenseman on their roster, but you see, Henry Thrun, who kind of like Krasinski. I know Thrun's a little bit older, but kind of got his teeth kicked in night out. But it's going to be one of those things where you expect that next year, like kind of that learning experience, and especially with young defensemen, right? You kind of just have to get your teeth kicked in for a year and then see what happens after you go from there. But I think it's a lot of similarities between the two, except for you guys have Connor Bedard, and we don't have that type of player quite yet. So, I think there are a lot of questions for both teams, but I think there's a bright future for both, and I can't wait until we can maybe one day be talking about potential playoff previews and all that stuff that all of our colleagues get to do, and we're just sitting here talking about how you lose again. So,
right.
One
like
day.
I said, JD, if it's not the Blackhawks, I do hope it is the San Jose Sharks, because I enjoy our conversations that we always have together here. And there would be, I think, even more similarities between these two franchises if the Sharks could get that number 1 overall selection in Macklin Celebrini. So could lead to more future fun shows down the road, potentially, with these two teams throughout their rebuilds moving forward.
Yeah. So, I don't want the Blackhawks to win it. Sorry, buddy.
I understand.
Already got one.
It's Blackhawks against the world. Blackhawks against the world, baby.
That's fine. So, Jack, where can the people find you, buddy?
Absolutely. If you want to catch up on any other Blackhawks news or my perspective on things leading up to the NHL draft, you can find Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, 100% free there. You can also find Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And if you want to give me a follow on X, you can find me at Jack Bushman too.
Of course, you can find Locked On Sharks wherever you listen to podcasts. Watch on YouTube as well. You can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. You can follow me on Twitter at MyFryHole. Till tomorrow, friends. Bye.